Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. And Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I try to provide a brief look at a couple of our lessons for the upcoming Sunday. And so I want to offer a brief look into the gospel reading for Sunday, July 19th, 2020, Matthew 13, verses 24 to 30 and verses 36 to 43. It's called the parable of the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds. When I was in seminary many decades ago, I was taught that a parable is an earthly story that seeks to convey a single spiritual truth. What attracted the crowds to Jesus was not just his miracles and not just his sermons, but it was his teachings on what the kingdom of God was like, what the kingdom of heaven was like. And the primary method for him to teach was by telling stories. Telling earthy, everyday example stories that related God's way, God's rule, God's reign on earth as it is in heaven in scenes that came out of ordinary life. However, Jesus would often draw a crowd in with a question, or he would be asked a question, and then he would respond with this wonderful story out of everyday life. But these stories would often have unexpected main characters, little surprising twists on maybe stories that they heard in their own everyday life prior to Jesus's telling of it. And events would happen which then Jesus would use to convey the point of what he's trying to make. It was a way to not put people on the defensive right away, draw them into the story, and then hit them with the main point. This parable in Matthew 13, it has a typical introduction of many of the parables. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to. And then he goes on to talk about what the kingdom is in a story. The kingdom means reign, rule, or will of God, the commonwealth of God. But it's wherever a community is living in harmony with God, neighbor, and self. Because these stories often have unexpected endings or outcomes, Jesus often closes them with a little phrase that we see at the end in verse 43. Let anyone with ears listen. How hard is it for you to hear a word of truth when you're given an answer that is different than you expected to hear? As we look at this story and the other parables that have been lifted up prior to this, and particularly as we're in this kind of series in Matthew, it's important to note context. And 95% of the population in Jesus's day made their living by working the land for wealthy absentee landlords or local wealthy landlords, serving as sharecroppers or fishing on the Sea of Galilee, or through the trades of supporting that agricultural economy. So many of the parables, it makes sense that Jesus uses agrarian images. I put a picture here to help understand how this one fits in Jesus's day. Scholars tend to believe that Jesus's audience knew what a field of wheat looked like. And they also knew the pervasiveness of unwanted weeds. And some weeds, as in this story, looked like the immature wheat until reaching a level of maturity. At that time, when you could distinguish between the wheat and the weed, it was too late to pluck the weeds out without damaging the root structure of the good wheat. So separation had to wait until harvest time. Many of us may find ourselves many years or even generations separated from life on the farm or intimately linked to an agrarian way of life. Like last Sunday's parable of the sower, who didn't seem to be a very competent, capable farmer, who wasted good seed on 3/4 of land that would never bring a crop, and saving only 1/4 of seed to plant it in good soil. The farmer in this story seems to have his expertise and skill in working the field questioned by his servants when they ask in verse 27, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? It's as if the slave servants are accusing the landowner of picking out bad seed at the seed store, or someone else selling them bad seed. Given the importance of bringing a crop to harvest to feed your family and your household, great care would have been given to planting only good seed and limiting the infestation of weeds and pests. This is no different than any 21st century farmer today. The farmer, knowing his field, knowing his intentionality in planting only good seed, answers his workers, "An enemy has done this." Now the slave servants, hearing that an enemy has polluted that land, that crop, are ready and willing to go and resolve this attack on their farmer's field and their livelihood. But the wisdom of the farmer throttles the urgency of to do something that actually might cause more harm than good. The farmer knows his business. He knows how his land works best. He understands the root structure, which, if interrupted before the wheat is ready to harvest, might just damage the whole crop. He also knows to let those whose job it is to separate the good from the bad, the reapers in this story, let them do their job. The reapers were skilled in maximizing the harvest and separating the chaff or waste. Coming back to our time, when have you experienced the value in waiting to do something that has the potential to do more harm than good? How have you benefited from relying on those with more experience and skill to deliver better results for a problem or predicament? Dr. David Lowes writes, "I think this parable is about ambiguity. Yes, the sower planted with good seeds. Yes, there are now weeds strewn among the wheat that puts the ideal harvest the sower had imagined at risk. Ideally, the servants could have ripped out the weeds, but the sower knows that to tear out the weeds now risks ruining the maturing wheat as well. And so the sower must wait, living with both the wheat and the weeds until the day of harvest, when they may be separated in due time." How often do we face similar dilemmas? If not with wheat and weeds, then with a multitude of other difficult choices. Like between getting a job to support the family or staying home to spend more time with the family, or between supporting someone who consistently struggles at work and pulls the quality of your team down, or firing that person, or between choosing the best school you've been accepted to or one that is more affordable, or between two different treatment options in responding to a grave illness, or between staying in your current call where things are comfortable or choosing to move on to newer but unknown pastures, or between giving in to peer pressure because it just plain sucks to be left out, or choosing to stick to your own values and risk isolation, or ambiguity. We know that. Our lives are littered with situations that have no clear answer, no clear or easy answer, and yet we may rarely talk about these things in church. Maybe we do not know what to say, or maybe we ourselves are not quite sure how the faith relates to this. But I hear in this parable, Jesus' promise that in ambiguous, challenging situations, we have the promise that in the end, God will work things out. God will sort things out. Jesus' parable is not easy to read or listen to for many of us. For some, there is discomfort in the images of the furnace of fire and weeping and gnashing of teeth in the explanation section. In the explanation section, Jesus acknowledges that during the daily life of his listeners, there's evil at work in the world, sometimes even when you're asleep. Jesus recognizes that sin is real. Causes of sin affect the course of daily living, and there are individuals and systems at work in opposition to the ways of God. Another way to approach this explanation and the imagery is that the sorting is not between those going to heaven or those going to hell. The children of the kingdom, the wheat, and the children of the evil one, the weeds, may actually be the distinction between those following Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and those who are following the teaching contrary to Jesus, the Pharisees. So is it possible that the weeping and gnashing of teeth does not refer to the tortured experience of unregenerated people in hell, but instead to the experience of some people who belong to God in some way and should have known what God expects of them and how they are to live? Is it possible that this can refer to believers who might have a negative experience in the judgment seat of Christ, or who experience the discipline of God in this life? Or might it also refer to Jewish people who should have known that Jesus was the promised Messiah? It may be the phrase weeping and gnashing of teeth, therefore, has nothing whatsoever to do with hell as it often has been taught, but it is instead a graphic and descriptive Middle Eastern way of expressing profound regret and shame, and maybe even fury. However we may want to approach this imagery of judgment and separation, what I appreciate about the great sort at the harvest time is that no human being is in charge. It is the angels, messengers, reapers, agents of the Son of Man who serve as the reapers and sorters. The servants, slaves, disciples, children of the kingdom are called to stay the course of following the farmer, the Son of Man, Jesus, in bringing good news of God's love for all. This parable, or at least the explanation, is a gift to caution any of us who may be tempted to judge who's in and who's out, and the potential for many who might appear initially as weeds, but in the end may actually be precious wheat. In closing, when have you found yourself surprised by making a wrong judgment about another? When has the church done more damage to the spiritual welfare of others by being preoccupied with determining who's saved and who isn't? Or as one critic said, the people in the church are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. The people in the church are so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. God bless you as you go into this week. God bless you as you journey forward, seeking to follow Jesus.